he, one thing that some of you may, especially Indians, Bengalis, may have heard his voice without knowing who he is. Durga Puja, those who have seen the Durga Puja telecast from Belur Math, often people have said it's a wonderful commentary, explanation of what's going on. The live commentary is there. So that's his voice. It's very popular, especially among Bengalis in Bengal, those who watch the Durga Puja there. And as you just heard, he is a brilliant student of economics and very deeply learned in the Shastras. He is much sought after for his talks also and very popular among students. We also acknowledge the vital role played by Mr. Champak Sadhu, who organized the whole thing, his whole trip to the United States and bringing him here. So he's here with us this evening too. Maharaj.
Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavipidiritam Kalmashapam Sravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuve Gnantiye Bhurida Jana. I apologize for this very generous introduction that that was conveyed to you, and I'm in fact a little doubtful how I would be able to present to you the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, because Sarvapriyananda ji undoubtedly has been now a very successful speaker in the West now. In fact, even when he went to Beluru Math last time, his lectures were very well received. Reverberations of his success here have also been felt there in India as well. And I'm also happy that on a weekday, I find almost a near full house. This is something which is encouraging. So today's topic is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna was actually written originally in English by Mahendranath Gupta. It was just after Sri Ramakrishna passed away. It was only later on that he decided to write in Bengali. Mahendranath Gupta had a fair reading of the Bible, and you can see its imprint on the title itself, the Gospel. All of you remember that there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament. Swami Vivekananda had lavished his praise for this recording of Sri Ramakrishna's words. He had said, Socratic dialogues are Plato all over. You are entirely hidden. This he had said about Master Moshe. It meant that the Greek philosopher Plato, a disciple of Socrates, he had compiled the dialogues of Socrates, and those are known as Socratic dialogues. But what Swamiji said was, Socratic dialogues are Plato all over. That is, the compiler Plato inadvertently had put himself too much into Socratic dialogues. But you are entirely hidden. Master Mahashaya, Mahendranath Gupta, has been very consciously behind the scenes. You will see him under various pseudonyms in this book. So sometimes he is M, sometimes he is a devotee, sometimes he is Mani, sometimes he is Master. The main purpose being that sometimes when you do a reminiscence of a person, often it is you who becomes more important. That is, when you try to recollect a person, you inadvertently actually delve deeper into the personal anecdotes of yours, your associations with that person, and the person who was originally intended go to the background. So Master the compiler, was very conscious about that. This is one feature of the book. Secondly, as I said, Master compiled the Bengali version later on. The first volume of the Bengali Kathamrita, or the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, was published in 1907. And the last one, the fifth volume, was published in 1932, the very year that Mahendranath Gupta passed away. In fact, he had even seen the last proof of that fifth volume. The entire life of his, as it were, was spent in compiling Sri Ramakrishna's words. In fact, when others would go to him to listen to what Sri Ramakrishna had said, he would very humbly say, "You see, I live by the side of a river of immortality, and I can only give you spoonfuls of that." Another feature of this book is, it is almost like a drama. In the drama, you find a narration of the place, the weather, the different characters, and a short introduction of the purport. All of these are there in the Gospel. And then he goes to the main discussion. Every day has been studiously recorded. In fact, he had been very conscious to avoid exaggerations. So much so that he would go on meditating on his diary notes, and then only he would give it in writing. Not satisfied with even this, he would sometimes go up to the characters who had been present on a particular day and read out to him or her his version of the recordings, and sometimes even do corrections to his recordings. So Master Mahendranath, he had been a regular writer of the diaries. I remember when I was a student of a Ramakrishna mission school at Narendrapur, one of our headmasters was revered Swami Suhitanandaji Maharaj. He is now one of the vice presidents of the order, and he was also the monk under whom Swami Sarvapriyanji joined at Deoghar. I remember his telling us that you should write diaries regularly. In those younger days, we were somewhat vexed by this. Another job on hand, another responsibility on our heads. But to tell you correctly, this is a way of looking back on the whole day's activity. Singha Avalokana. A lion, it is said, looks back at the activities he had done. So a diary helps you assess the whole day's activities, what and the rights and the wrongs that you have committed. So Master did that in a brief way. He had his notes. And only later on were these elaborated upon and given this form. This is another characteristic of the book. And the third one is, you can see at the very beginning of his recordings, Sri Ramakrishna's many of the words were colloquial. Okay? You don't get the scent in English translation. In fact, because all of us, we want to think about him, So he had a bit of a stammering while he uttered those words. So this only goes on to prove that the manner of speaking, how beautifully you can flourish or garner your words, those are not important. What is important is the content of your speech. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, in another context, would say, you see, Sri Ramakrishna's words were often rustic. Sometimes he would use words which can be treated as abuses nowadays. But those were only the exterior, the froth. In their sense, he was full of love, full of knowledge. And that indeed is reflected in this book. One of my classmates, now a professor at Presidency College, Srimati Mukherjee, has written a book recently on Sri Ramakrishna's words in this gospel. She makes a very pertinent remark. She says that you see, through these songs of the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna has conveyed the deepest religious truths. So songs, in a sense, became the vehicle through which difficult intellectual things could reach the heart of men and women. Often logic goes to the brain alone. It doesn't touch the heart. But a song, a tune, you heard wonderful songs, a few of them little earlier. They can reach the heart. They can mold you easily. And this Sri Ramakrishna would do often. In the pages of the gospel, you can see him singing, sometimes individually or sometimes in a milieu, in a collection, in a chorus. Thirdly, I remember when I had joined newly in the year 1985, long back, as she said, 40 years back almost. So there in Ranchi, a greenhorn that I was, I had a senior brahmacharin there. And his mother tongue was Marathi. Jayant Maharaj, he insisted that he studies the gospel along with me. My duty was that he would be studying the Bengali, he'll try to sort out the meanings, and I would compare the English ones. And lo, I was taken by surprise, because many of the words of Sri Ramakrishna were not known to us even, that is the Bengali-speaking public. Many of the words, especially the nuances that the words carried in the songs, were unknown to us. So this translation by Swami Nikhilanandaji Maharaj was an indirect way for us to get at the meanings. Much later on, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna was systematically arranged chronologically. What Nikhilanji had done years back in English was only done later on in Bengali from Belur Mutt, the publication house at Bagh Bazaar. Nikhilanji's book, in all probability, had truncated some portions because it is difficult to understand. Some songs probably have been repeated a number of times, but the Bengali version have carried all the days. Why I bring this point is, when you read the book in English today, you find it chronological. But Master Moshai's recording of the book was somewhat strange, somewhat peculiar. What he did was, because he had brought out 5 volumes, okay? So if you compare these 5 volumes, what we did in our younger days, I feel some of you might have read the original 5 volumes, isn't it? Some of you could see through the original 5 volumes, Maharaj has said. So these original 5 volumes, if you see one after another, it can so happen that some days that appear in the first volume, and still earlier day comes in the second volume. That is what I want to say is, sometimes he had skipped on the days and come back again. Just imagine his recording of the book over a span of so many years, 1907 to 1932. So for him, this was a deep meditation, Sri Ramakrishna. In fact, one of the Kannada famous literature, a disciple of Swami Shivanandaji Maharaj, he has compared the Kathamrita, that is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, to be like an archway, like a doorway to a temple. If you want to enter a temple, you should do through an archway, a door which reminds you of the deity within, isn't it? Similarly, this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna takes you to the deity or the person whom we revere, Sri Ramakrishna. And it does with so much of accuracy, with so much of conscientious effort, that there should be no exaggerations. What he has indeed said must be recorded. So with this, I come to another feature of this book. It is the scientific accuracy, the scientific outlook towards the recording of days, recording of incidents. In fact, I have rarely seen reminiscences being recorded with such accuracy. All the characters and their manner of speaking, their words, have been recorded properly. In fact, much later, a chronology of the persons who have spoken there have come out. Now, if you see the recent versions, you see notes of the persons. Sri Ramakrishna has used so many songs, and other than Sri Ramakrishna, other devotees have sung songs in his presence, right? So that together gives you a pen picture of the times, that's the 19th century, when the days are being recorded. One reputed historian, Shumit Sarkar, a modern historian, has said, you see, through these pages of the Gospel, Shumit Sarkar is not a devotee. Shumit Sarkar is one of the important Marxian historians in today's India. But he says, this recording of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna has been so faithful that through that you can see the medieval or the 19th century Bengal of those days. 19th century Bengal was a very important time. It is said that the Bengal Renaissance heralded the rise of modern India. You must have heard those sayings, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. So 19th century was a crucible during which Western thought and the Sanatana thoughts, the thoughts that India bore in her bosom for centuries, mixed together and produced what is known as Renaissance, newer thought. Just as after many years, the thoughts of the Greeks and the Romans caused a renaissance in Europe. Similarly, it is said that during these years, especially after 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny, Bengal had a similar renaissance. And the exact pen picture of that, a reliable pen picture, is this book, The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So I take this liberty to come up with one day, okay, just a one day as a sample. Because unless you take one day, at least you won't have a clear flavor of the recordings. Of course, Maharaj has been going through the texts, but I decided to get hold of this opportunity as well. This Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna also gives you many important characters. Just to name a few. First of all is Girish Chandra Ghosh, the famous dramatist. In fact, you can credit him with announcing the arrival or the significance of Sri Ramakrishna. Whether it is 1st January, which we celebrate as, you remember, as the Kalpataru Divas, when Sri Ramakrishna is supposed to have bestowed his grace on everyone, all and sundry. Kalpataru. Taru is a tree. Kalpa come from imagination. So whatever you want on that day, he had bestowed his grace upon others. Kalpataru. Girish Ghosh was the person who, in fact, ignited that compassion in Sri Ramakrishna. There have been other incidents as well. At the Shampukur Bati, where Sri Ramakrishna was there, before moving in his last days to Kashipur, there also there was a similar Kali Puja celebration. Any of you remember? On this special day, actually, Sri Ramakrishna was ill, and at Shampukur Bati, he was sitting on a cot. Devotees were all sitting on the floor. There have been arrangements for puja. Flowers were there, incense sticks were there, sandal paste were there. But no one knew how to start the Kali Puja because there was no image as such. Suddenly an idea arose in the mind of Girish. He thought that can't we do the worship of Mother Kali in Sri Ramakrishna? In fact, this is what he did. He took flowers in his hands and offered it to Sri Ramakrishna. And then others followed suit. The idea being that in Sri Ramakrishna, there was a special Abir Bhava, advent of Mother Kali. He sat in that posture in trance, samadhi, bestowing his grace upon others. When we recollect these incidents now, after more than 100 years, it is easier to believe, isn't it? Because these are all parts of history. But in that period, when Sri Ramakrishna was there sitting in front, declaring him to be a veritable manifestation of God was a very bold proposition, I tell you. In fact, sometimes Sri Ramakrishna himself would test Girish Ghosh. Sometimes he would be annoyed at Girish Ghosh declaring him to be an incarnation of God. Okay. But Girish Ghosh it was not easy to confuse him. He was bold and he could speak out his words very clearly. So what I want to say is such characters you see in this gospel. Girish Ghosh, then Mahendralal Sarkar, the scientists who had founded the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, and who was the doctor to Sri Ramakrishna and an agnostic to Capitol. And how would he behave in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna? That is an interesting proposition. Sri Ramakrishna would say jokingly, you see, earlier the doctor, he would come here and now he is diluted. Sri Ramakrishna would use a few English words. He'd say, Doctor ekhon dilute hoye geche. Doctor has now become dilute. That is, his hard crust has fallen off. And he would smilingly look at the doctor and say, Doctor, you are spending too much time here. And the doctor would look at him and say, you see, you do not know how much of fees I am missing, how much of money I am unable to earn, because I am going on for hours sitting in front of you. And then in mock anger, he would say, you see, don't talk in front of others. You have a cancer in your throat. But when I come in, you can speak. Okay. So these are characters, Vidyasagar, one of the doyens of Bengal Renaissance, apparently not a believer in God, but a great literature and considered to be the founder of, means the systematizer of Bengali grammar. Interestingly, when in 1882, when Sri Ramakrishna went to see Vidyasagar, he was all diffidence actually. If you see the description, 5th of August 1882, Sri Ramakrishna goes to Vidyasagar, and in the carriage, he tells Mahendranath. Mahendranath was a teacher in Vidyasagar school. He tells him that, am I correctly attired for Vidyasagar? Are my buttons okay? Because he would never put a shirt, okay? He couldn't be formal at all. But Master Mashai, he smiled and said, Apnar jonno kichu noy. Nothing for you. You need not be formal. Why was he so diffident? Because Vidyasagar was 16 years older to him. And even in his younger days, he had heard about Vidyasagar. Because Vidyasagar's place of birth, Virsingha village, was not very far from Kamarpukur, the birthplace of Sri Ramakrishna. And since he had heard about Vidyasagar from his younger days, Vidyasagar was almost like a fable, a person to be revered. And interestingly, Sri Ramakrishna himself asked M that, can I go and meet Vidyasagar one day? Vidyasagar, when he heard this, because Mahendranath M was an employee in his school, was a teacher, later he became the headmaster. He said, Kirakom Paramahansho? What kind of a Paramahansa? Because he was not a believer of God. Kirakom Thaken? How does he dress himself? So M said, Sharakhon Bhagavanir Chinta Thake. He always is immersed in the thought of God. Vidyasagar said, okay, you can bring him. But what amuses you, what perplexes you, if you see the recording, that there it is torrents of words coming out of Sri Ramakrishna. And Vidyasagar, the great literature, is only a spectator there. I remember, truthfully speaking, when I had first read the recording, I thought that Mahendranath was exaggerating facts. Okay, because he was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, such were his recordings. But later I understood, I had gone to a program where this Vidyasagar's house was being given up as a museum. Then we understood all the more that Sri Ramakrishna would say, you see, when the goddess of Saraswati is there to supply you with knowledge, you are never short of knowledge, of learning. She always gives you from the side, gives you her supply of lessons, of knowledge. So Vidyasagar is a mere spectator there. And Ramakrishna goes on, who has never attended a proper school or a college, goes on speaking. Oh, such words of wisdom. Even in translations, those are wonderful words. Now there is Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was one of the foremost novelists of Bengal and also a government officer. He is also an important character in Bengal Renaissance. In fact, interesting story about Bankim Chandra. Bankim Chandra was, just to tell you how powerful he was as a district magistrate. All of you remember that Swami Vivekananda studied in the college. The name of the college was General Assemblies Institution. Today it's known as Scottish Church College. And many of you could be knowing the name of his principal. Can any of you just help me out? Name of the principal of Swami Vivekananda or Narendranath? William Hastie, right? So William Hastie himself was a philosopher, or rather teacher of philosophy. And Swamiji had great admiration for him. In fact, later on when he came to America, when people said that you have an Irish pronunciation, yes, he had said, you see, that's natural, because my teacher had an Irish pronunciation. He was actually born in Irish. So William Hastie was an Irish. He was the principal of General Assemblies Institution. Why I came to William Hastie was, Bankim Chandra in those days when the British were the rulers, put a case against William Hastie. That was a case when he was supposed to have dishonored Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. And William Hastie had to stay behind bars for some period. Imagine, those days when the British were the rulers, Bankim Chandra had such grit and such powers that it could go to the court against the principal of a college. But such Bankim Chandra Chatterjee in front of Thakur could only stay quiet. In fact, Thakur severely rebuked Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay when he spoke worldly words in front of Thakur. Such an elite person, but in front of Sri Ramakrishna, somehow he had to be subdued. So these are characters of the Bengal Renaissance, as I was telling you. Okay, Girish Chandra Ghosh, one of the foremost dramatists, Vidyasagar, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, and there were others also. Of course, Narendranath Datta was there, later Swami Vivekananda. You can see him in his various hues in this book. Okay, sometimes he is the young rebel intellectual. Sri Ramakrishna would often love putting him in debate in front of Girish Ghosh or with Mohendralal Sarkar, the doctor. So these are pen pictures that you see in the gospel. Okay? When you read the gospel, do not merely read in devotion. Read between the lines. Then you can understand how these lives have been shaped. How the touch, the Midas touch, as it's said, the philosopher's stone of Sri Ramakrishna, how they had changed their lives as well. As I said, I am just taking up one part of it. So this particular day that I am taking up for you is a day at Kashipur. Any of you have visited Kashipur, by the way? Kashipur? Some of you have visited Kashipur, right? So Kashipur was actually the last days of Sri Ramakrishna were spent at Kashipur. Kashipur actually in those days was a suburb of Kolkata. Now it is a part of Kolkata. And Sri Ramakrishna, because he had to be looked after properly, he had been affected with cancer, whose cure, you can imagine, more than 100 years back, it was almost non-curable, naturally, because it's non-curable even today after so many years. So people there assembled to serve him, because he was staying at a distance at Dakshineshwar. When he had the first throat pain, it started, he had thought that, well, he had been taking ice creams too much. Ice creams are very popular in America. So he was very fond of ice creams. Okay. So initially they had thought that the sore throat had come because of this. Englishmen in those days would say the name of the disease was clergyman's sore throat. Clergymans, like we are supposed to talk too much. So clergyman would have such sores in their throat. So it was known as clergyman's sore throat. Narendranath, after discussing with the doctors, he was still just passed out of the college, understood that, well, this was a grave disease. They gradually assembled at Kashipur. They were prepared that Sri Ramakrishna's last days were nearing. But interestingly, great lives like Sri Ramakrishna's, even the smallest of incidents, which are apparently just physical ones, have deeper purposes. If not done consciously, they turn out to have a greater purpose. Because at Kashipur, these disciples of Sri Ramakrishna gradually came together. Earlier, they had been staying in their separate houses. But now, under the pretext of serving Sri Ramakrishna, they had come and were staying in the same house. On the ground floor, they were staying, and Sri Ramakrishna was staying on the first floor. In America, the second floor, right? So there he was staying, and many of them were very young. Some of them had not passed out of the college. Their parents were unhappy about that. Because when we come to the Ramakrishna mission, we become brahmacharis and sadhus. Ramakrishna mission is a well-established institution, okay? our parents are at least sure that we would have our meals. There's no doubt about that, because so many devotees are there now. Okay, but in those days, the young men who would throng Sri Ramakrishna, not many in number, many of them very good in studies. You see, the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, many of them came from the city of Kolkata. So they had a bright future in front. Narendranath came from a family of lawyers. Okay. His father was a lawyer. His uncle was a lawyer. Himself had been preparing for the law examination. Sharat Maharaj, Swami Sharodananda ji, the best biographer of Sri Ramakrishna, was exceedingly good in studies. The doyen of science teaching in Kolkata, as it is said, a father of St. Xavier's College, Father Lafont. So Sharat was a very dear student of Father Lafont. And he even had enrolled himself for the medical course. But such was the pull of Sri Ramakrishna, such was the pure, unalloyed love, that gradually all these worldly career building, they gave up. Can the parents be happy? Never, isn't it? They thought that, well, they were, as it is said, they were cutting across their own feet, as it is said. Okay. And naturally, parents expect their sons and daughters look after them. But such was their love for Sri Ramakrishna and the ideal that he epitomized in his life. Earlier they had seen him at Dakshineshwar, but now at Kashipur, they could have his contact more closely, more personally. One thing which astounded them was, here was a person affected with cancer and gradually becoming skin and bones, and yet always speaking of God. No worldly thoughts at all, no worldly discussions. In fact, at Kashipur it so happened that Narendranath and some of the other disciples went up to him and said, "Apnar kotha to ma shonen." The mother listens to what you say. Can't you request her so that you can be cured? So such was their earnest request. Sri Ramakrishna said, stayed quiet. The next day, when they came back again and asked him, "Jigesh korechilen take? Have you asked her?" He said, as if greatly ashamed, he said, "Yes, I told the mother." And she said, "You are eating through so many mouths. Aren't you satisfied with this? Are not you satisfied with this?" You see, when you read this initially, you feel it's a lofty premise, isn't it? The Upanishadic premise which says that, well, just like the sun high up in the sky is reflected in various mirrors, similarly the Paramatman is reflected in the individual Atmans, the Pratyagatman, individual selves. Well, it's difficult to understand it when it comes to pain, cancer, isn't it? Easy to theorize. But the person who is affected with cancer, he cannot eat anything. He was literally only surviving on liquid diet. But here is a person, he says that, yes, I'm ashamed that such a thought came in my mind, that I could pray for my own health. So the disciples were astounded. Could it be so? When you come to the Ramakrishna Mission or to the Vedanta Society, you see you have a temple or a place of worship, meditation. But here these young men were attracted by the purity of Sri Ramakrishna, by his legacy, by his life. And they were not fools. Most of them were very good students of schools or colleges. So they tested Sri Ramakrishna again and again. Sharat Maharaj, Swami Sharadananda ji, in fact categorically says in his book, he says, do not suppose, take it for granted that we were all devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, not at all. Again and again we had tested him. None of us were prepared to accept what he said initially. But later when we understood that what he said was absolute truth, he never deviated from truth, so here was a revelation to them. Okay, right. So I'm just reading out a bit of it. M is saying, the day is a day at Kashipur, last days of Sri Ramakrishna. Year is 1886, right. M, there is yet another purpose in this illness. The chronicler, M, he in fact, Sri Ramakrishna would sometimes seek his views. How does he understand the teachings of the Master, of Sri Ramakrishna? So sometimes M would be allowed to speak. It is as it were that he had a hunch, Sri Ramakrishna, that one day M would be indirectly a teacher as well. Because it is through his writings that we know Sri Ramakrishna intimately now, after so many years, okay? So M says, the chronicler, there is yet another purpose in this illness. It is the final sifting of disciples. Sifting is separating of disciples. The devotees have achieved in these few days what they could not have realized by 5 years tapasya. Their love and devotion are growing by leaps and bounds. Master, that is Sri Ramakrishna. That may be true, but Niranjan went back home. Please tell me what you feel. To Niranjan, he was saying. Niranjan says, by the way, Niranjan is one of the young disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, very bold, physically very strong, and not easily to be tamed. But Niranjan gradually is ensnared by the love of Sri Ramakrishna, okay? Niranjan, formerly I loved you, no doubt, but now it is impossible for me to live without you. M, one day I found out how great these young men were. Master, where? M, sir, one day I stood in a corner of the house at Shampukur and watched the devotees. In his last days, he was at Kashipur for the 8 months, and before that, he was at Shampukur for 3 months. So M had watched things at Shampukur as well. I clearly saw that every one of them had made his way here through almost insurmountable obstacles and given himself over to your service. Sri Ramakrishna in those days, who was he apparently? He was not the head of a religious organization. He was an individual. He had done great tapasya, but in the agnostic age of 19th century Bengal, it was difficult to convince people that here was a Paramahansa who had given himself up to realization of God. Not only that, he is calling others also to join him. How can parents be convinced? But yet, in spite of this, these disciples had insurmountable obstacles and had come to him. M, wonderingly, it may be, Master, even now I am seeing the formless, indivisible Satchidananda, just like that. But I have suppressed my feelings with great difficulty. What you said about the sifting of disciples was right. This illness is showing who belong to the inner circle and who to the outer. Those who are living here, renouncing the world, belong to the inner circle. and those who pay occasional visits and ask, "How are you doing, sir?" belong to the outer circle. Didn't you notice Bhavanath? Bhavanath is a friend of Narendranath, that is Swami Vivekananda. The other day he came to Shampukur dressed as a bridegroom and asked me, "How are you?" I haven't seen him since. I show him love for Narendra's sake, but he is not in my thought anymore. These are interesting incidents in Sri Ramakrishna's life. As I said, these disciples have now come near him and they are watching him closely. And you see, even persons coming to a teacher or in a college or in a school, there are various categories of students, isn't it? Some are very earnest, want to have their learning, and some are just merely recorded their names in the schools or the colleges. They are not earnest about gathering knowledge. So similarly with the spiritual teacher as well, he is watching the disciples closely. In spite of himself being affected by cancer, even he is observing the disciples. What is their earnestness? Bhavanath was one whom Sri Ramakrishna had loved very much earlier. But now he is no longer into it. He doesn't want to give himself totally to M. These are spiritual thoughts. When God assumes a human body for the sake of his devotees, many of his devotees accompany him to this earth. Some of them belong to the inner circle, some to the outer circle, and some become the suppliers of his physical needs. When Jesus Christ, Peter, James and others, many of them were fishermen actually. So he says in the New Testament, he says, you see, I will make you fishers of men. So formal education was not important for them. They became men of characters. Why? Because they had touched the philosopher's stone. They had been turned into gold. So similarly are these disciples. In those days, the world had not recognized them. In those days, they were merely young boys just passed out from the schools or colleges. But in later days, these disciples became the pillars on which the Ramakrishna movement flourished, who literally gave their lives for this. Trigunatitanandaji Maharaj literally became the martyr to the cause, isn't it? Because, as you know, in San Francisco, Hollywood, when he was speaking at the rostrum, a deranged person, threw a bomb at him. And in fact, finally he succumbed to that. The person who had thrown the bomb, he also died. And Trigunatit Maharaj also passed away. So much of insurmountable difficulties they had overcome. Today, when we go to the Vedanta societies, I was just discussing with Sarvapriyanji. Now you have seen so many erstwhile Indians who have come from India to listen to our lectures, to be with us. When Swami Vivekananda came here to America, because I have read through his life a bit thoroughly, and especially Marie-Louise Burke's books, I used to wonder, was there even a single Indian at the time in his lecture? I haven't seen. So when you see that 300 people were there in his lectures, sometimes the hall should be so full that they had to sit on the driveway. Sometimes they would sit on the staircases. And in those days, you didn't have these electric mics even, isn't it? You have to reach out to a big audience by just shouting. You have a strong voice you have had to have. But you see, such powers they had, such purity of characters, that they come to a different land. Swamiji says in one of his letters, you see, only another person could understand how difficult work I'm undertaking. When he comes to America, he says, I have come to a land, people of this land do not know anything about Sanskrit. They do not know anything about the Hindu cultural heritage. But here it is, I have seen earnest men and women. They are ready for religion, but they do not know the language. For giving the basics of philosophy for them is so much difficult. It was such a difficult task for them. Bhagini Nivedita, Sister Nivedita, in later days, in the introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, would write a line that is so wonderful. She said, you see, one day the Britishers would go away from India. It is written in the year 1910. Britishers were due to stay in that country for 37 more years. But she writes then, one day the Britishers would go away from India, but their language would remain. And through this language, that is English, the words of our master, that is Swami Vivekananda, would reach the Indians of the time. Mothers would teach their children their philosophies through this language. And this has been literally so much true. It is because of Swami Vivekananda that most of us, we had been drawn to Vedanta, to the Gita, to religion. So, Swami Vivekananda, when he preached Vedanta or religion in the West, it was not merely a service to the American or to the British. In fact, indirectly, it had its effect in rousing the Indians as well. As I was saying, their task was all the more difficult because you didn't have such a huge Indian population in those days, isn't it? So he had to cater fully to the American audience, so much more difficult. So just, I'll tell you one thing, I read this portion. He says, you see, Sri Ramakrishna says, that I have seen in a special vision of mine that there would be various persons who would finance my purpose, that is my mission. Mathura Mahan was one such. Shambhu was another. Okay? He says, the Divine Mother showed me in a vision the 5 suppliers of my needs. First, Mathur Babu. And second, Shambhu Mollik, whom I had not then met. So, like a deep thinker, I remember 2 years earlier, I had a chance to go to the Cambridge University, away from London. So there, where Newton is supposed to have discovered the laws of gravitation when the apple fell from the tree, that site they had kept as an enclosure. They are cautious because there's an incident which happened long back. But mere felling of the apple, did it really happen only one time? No. Apple had fallen many times, isn't it? So that was one catalyst which ignited that knowledge in the mind of Newton. So a deep thinker sometimes can see through individual events and generalize. So Sri Ramakrishna also thinks about the future. Mathura Mohan he had seen, but the other suppliers of his needs he sees in a vision. Shambhu Mollik and others. In fact, why I picked this portion is, he said that I see that in later days, white persons would come and help us in this mission. When he said, can you understand? Others naturally didn't understand what he was saying. In fact, Swami Sharadanand ji says in his book that Oli Bull of Boston, Cambridge, and others could be such supporters of the movement of Sri Ramakrishna. That is, Sri Ramakrishna's movement was not confined to Bengal or to India even. Here was a movement which would have its ramifications beyond the shores of India. Here was a movement which would suit the needs of the time. Vedanta in the modern times, practical Vedanta and its suitability in the modern age would redefine Hinduism. Nivedita says about Swami Vivekananda's paper on Hinduism that he read at the Chicago Parliament. She says, you see, Hindu religion had so many diverse streams that it was difficult to understand what Hinduism really stood for. So many devatas, isn't it? You can name many. In fact, literally speaking, who we call ourselves Hindu, probably we won't be able to name all the deities that are worshipped in India. Literally speaking, I'm saying. I've been to many states in India, so many different kinds of worship. So here in Bengal you have Kali, Saraswati, Jagadhatri, Lakshmi. When you go to South India, you see Karthikeyan. In Maharashtra, you see Ganeshan. So various kinds of devatas. To a Westerner, when he or she first goes there, he's puzzled. What is Hinduism really? What is the main stream of Hinduism? So Swamiji says this paper on Hinduism redefined Hinduism, set a charter whereby people can understand what the thrust of Hinduism is. So this movement, the Ramakrishna movement, Ramakrishna merely lived for 50 years. But its import is deep. Swami Shivananda Ji Maharaj, a disciple, he says in his words, it is said, you see, the birth of Sri Ramakrishna has raised the Kula Kundalini, the coiled up energy of the world as it were. Don't you see? There are so many religious movements now coming up. Many of them won't say directly that they are indebted to Sri Ramakrishna, or probably they are not conscious even. It was Sri Ramakrishna who gradually raised this consciousness about religion. But that is true. His sadhana, his spending of his entire life on discovering these religious truths and declaring to the world, Joto Mat, Toto Pot. As many faiths, so many paths. The Bhagavad Gita says, Ye yathamam prapadyante tangs tathaiva bhajamyaham mama vartmanuvartante manushya partha sarvasha. Its meaning is, Ye yathamam prapadyante. As different people call on me differently, yathamam prapadyante. Tan tatha eva, accordingly, tatha eva, bhajami aham. Accordingly, I show grace towards them. Mama varthma anuvartante. This word varthma means path. Mama varthma anuvartante. My path they are following. Anu means following. Anu is an upasarga, which means to follow. Anuvartante. Manushya partha sarvasha. Men, by all means, are following the path of God unknowingly. So the different religions of the world converge to the same Ishvara. Probably they don't know that. They don't know that Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, all of them converge to the same goal, same God. You see, like the different languages that we speak, isn't it? The different languages are uttered in different parts of the world. How they have come up, the different languages, often we don't know that. But they are different means of expressing the same fact by different languages. Similarly, the different religions actually speak of the same Ishvara. Often they don't know themselves. That is why sometimes even today we have quarrels, fights, even killings. So Sri Ramakrishna's advent signaled this, that harmony and peace are not dissension. Swamiji's words, okay? I went to visit this 9/11 memorial today. I remember when this happened in 2001, 11th of September, the India government, it had just happened. The bombings had happened here. Okay, still people didn't know what had happened. So the India government, on the Indian television, Swamiji's words are being printed and declared. Okay, Swamiji's words at the Parliament of Religions, he had said, harmony and peace and not dissension. So Parliament of Religions, actually, Swamiji himself said in one of his lectures that actually this was nothing new for us. We had seen a life whose whole life actually was a Parliament of Religions, because he had practiced the different religions. It was not mere theorizing. He had himself practiced them and declared, and that is the reason of his authenticity. Because such attempts, such declarations had come earlier also. Those who have been students of history would remember that Dara Shikoh, okay, one of the Mughal emperors, son of probably Babur, Akbar. Dara Shikoh also had tried to establish such a religion, Deen-i Ilahi. But people only now remember it in the books of history. No one practices them. Similarly with the other faiths also. Many other religious preachers also have said, all converge to the same goal. Do we remember? We don't. So here is a life which has made it concrete, had made it perceptible, made it understandable. So the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna actually is a vivid description of such a life. Bhagavad Gita says, you see, Sthita Pragyasaka Bhasha Samadhistasya Keshava Sthitadhi Kim Prabhasheta Kimasita Vrajeta Kim. Arjuna is saying that, oh Krishna, how can I understand that a person is Sthita Pragya? He has a Pragya, an intellect, which is unmoved, Sthita. How can I recognize such a person? That is, suppose we often flaunt our degrees, isn't it? I say I'm a PhD, or he says I'm sir or madam. We flaunt these degrees. But a Sthita Pragya, a person of religious wisdom, he has nothing to flaunt, okay? He doesn't have a huge bank balance. He doesn't have a huge land. He has not a huge army battalion to come up with him. Or a convoy going on with a siren. Today morning we were walking on the Central Park, and Maharaj told me that, you see, here's the mayor of the city going on. You have a big convoy. I was amazed. I saw from a distance, because today was virtually my first day here. But he has no such convoy, nothing to declare. So how do you recognize a Sthita Pragya? He says, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, he tells him that, you see, you can only detect him through his behavior towards others. How does he talk? How does he behave towards others? With compassion, with love, with unselfishness. Even when he is willing to give up his body for the sake of others, even when he is affected with cancer, he says, no, I can only speak for the welfare of others. I don't care for my own body. Such persons are like the lampposts that give light in history. In the tunnel of time, they stand tall. After they pass away, as we move ahead in history, their shadow becomes longer and longer and longer. I'm so happy that I could come here, and all of you have given me such a patient hearing, and especially I thank Sarva Priyananji that he has arranged for this talk of mine. We can take in one or two remarks or questions so that we can have some interactions.
I think it was I like the way you brought it all alive for us. It was really beautifully done, I have to say. I think we all enjoyed it because you really made it come alive and brought all the nuanced little nuances to life for all of us, and really like to thank you. We have Swami Sarvapriyananda, he always does the lecture for us, but this was different, and it was very wonderful to hear you speak.
Actually, yes, please. She also wants to say something.
Pranam Swamiji. So when you talked about inner circle and outer circle, I was thinking probably Sri Ramakrishna had compassion for everyone, right? Universal compassion.
Right.
But when you talked about inner circle and outer circle, did he have extra compassion?
But that's a nice question. Okay, acha. I could give an example. Look. See, suppose there are a number of admirers or devotees who come to the center here. But suppose there are some who come very regularly, and you can clearly see that they are earnest in their desire to progress in religious life. So won't you feel that Maharaj would be a little more partial towards them, or would care more for them? Because he or she is earnest to take up that lesson in his life or her life, isn't it? Because he or she, just like Sri Ramakrishna was doing, would like to pass on the knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna, when he was at the end of his sadhana, he had climbed on the roof of a house and said, "Where are you? Dear devotees, please come in. I am burning with worldly people. When would you come?" No one had come really at that time. But you see, when a person is earnest, his wishes are filled. The biography says thereafter, devotees started coming. Narendranath in 1881. Narendranath, if you call him the chief among monks, he was there in 1881. And if you call Mahendranath Gupta the foremost among household devotees, he came in 1882. And the interesting thing is, Sri Ramakrishna passed away in 1886. So it was not even 10 years that he stayed there after all. But he was ready to give his whole treasure to them, bag full of jewels. He was eager to give to them. Barely 50 years he had survived, you see. But now a worldwide movement now. And you see, without much of pretensions, not much of show. This is a movement which stresses on practical Vedanta, stresses on proper vichara. In addition to these discussion on the lives, parallelly you see discussion on the scriptures are there, intellectual understanding. Here also, sometimes you speak on the Upanishads or the Gita. That gives a separate dimension to it. It's not merely devotion. You must also do a vichara so that these teachings are practicalized in your individual lives. These can't remain only in the rostrums. When you work in your office, in your house, in the neighborhood, such teachings must get reflected in your lives. That's the idea. Right? So naturally, a little bit of partiality would come there. Right? Anyone else?
So Swamiji, you were talking about the fact that many previous spiritual people and religions have said that different paths lead to the same God, but that Sri Ramakrishna, because he lived it and he proved it by his own practices, that it stays as true and it spread as far, and the power of his message has gone forth. And yet today there's so much conflict.
Well,
So how do you have any comments about how much more power Sri Ramakrishna's words would have for the future?
Yes, I remember when I was, I had read the Chicago address of Swami Vivekananda. There he says that, you see, the bell that told this told, T-O-L-L-E-D, told this in the morning, would signify the end of all religious hatred, he says there. I would read this and start wondering, that was way back in 1893. But still religious hatred, discrimination hasn't stopped. The greatest of acharyas to have uttered these words, Swami Vivekananda. But you see, like the dirt that comes in the room, isn't it? Every day you have to go on scrubbing. Today you do the scrubbing on Monday, 7 days after, again you see the dust again in the room, isn't it? So long as there would be men in the world, men and women, Sattva, Raja, Tama, these are the Sankhya philosophy says, because men and women, so long as they have these traits, Sattva is equanimity, Rajas is incessant activity, Rajas, and Tamas is inertia, laziness, dullness. So every human being is a combination of these. Some have more elements of Sattva, so we call him a Sattvika person. Some is a workaholic. He or she can't stay without work. He's a Rajasika. And some are eternally lazy. Okay. So ever giving excuses why he or she shouldn't do works, he's a Tamasika. So long as these combinations would be there, a bit of when a civilization improves, goes to the zenith, then this sattva element has increased. In fact, such increase or upheaval in civilization comes riding on the wave of such individuals like Sri Ramakrishna or Jesus Christ or Buddha, who have inspired a whole nation or a society to devote themselves for a greater cause. I had been a student of economics actually. Okay. So I remember we used to read about Industrial Revolution. Why had Industrial Revolution come into Britain and why not in other countries? So I remember one of the interesting causes that they have set down, economic historians, they said, you see, there was a religious movement there in England, probably Calvinists, who had told men and women, convinced men and women to be disciplined in their lives, to save money, to not to spend their money on useless luxuries. So they say this religious movement indirectly encouraged them to save. And this is how the seeds of saving and capital building came up. And this is how big industries were formed thereafter all. The scientific inventions were put into practice, concretized. When such philosophies are there, scientific inventions are there, but unless you practicalize it, unless the society adopts that, they aren't applied, isn't it? They aren't used. So for that you require characters, good characters. So one of the causes set there was, see, a religious movement. When a person or persons are men or women of characters, then the society as a whole can be raised. Otherwise, scientific inventions can't count. Huge nuclear explosions come in spite of the greatest scientific inventions. Oppenheimer, once film, so popular now, or had received a number of awards. In fact, the persons who had discovered or had first tested the bombs, they were not willing to test the bombs or to throw the bomb on a new country, on Japan. In spite of this, when these tendencies are there within human beings or in statesmen, heads of states, the bombs are thrown. Thousands across generations are maimed. Okay. So unless the men of character are there, unless great religious thoughts are there, religion is not only ceremonials. That should change men and women, then only it becomes life. So again and again such dirt would come in society. So in fact Bhagavad Gita and the Chandi both say, I'll just quote from the Chandi because Bhagavad Gita is well known. Itham yada yada badha danavotha bhavishyati tada tada avatiryaham karishyamari sanshayam. There the Divine Mother, the power says, what does she say? Itham yada yada badha. Such obstructions, whenever they come, Danava uttha bhavishyati, coming from demons. Demons are not there only, you can't say that Saddam Hussein was a demon or Bin Laden was a demon. It says demon is there within all of us. Itham yada, yada bala, Danava uttha, rising from Danava, bhavishyati, tada tada avatiryaham. Then I come. Avatirya, coming down. Karishami ari sanshayam. Ari means an enemy. Then I destroy those foes. So again and again such powers would come, do a scavenging work. Again the dirt will come and this will go on. This is how in circular pattern, like cycles go on. Right? Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.